Hello everyone, thank you for being here. This is Lessons from Brick City, Newark School Reform at a Crossroads, and we will kick it right off, and I'll introduce the moderator, Dale Ruscott.
Hello everyone, welcome to our panel. We are going to be talking about the education reform efforts that have been going on in Newark for almost 5 years now. This began with a good bit of fanfare in September 2010 when Mark Zuckerberg, Cory Booker, and Chris Christie announced on the Oprah Winfrey Show that the Facebook founder, who was then 26 years old, was giving $100 million as a challenge grant to Newark. And the purpose of the grant was, and I quote, to give Cory Booker and Chris Christie the flexibility they need to turn Newark into a symbol of educational excellence for the whole nation. Their idea was that in 5 years they would emerge with a model for how to turn around failing school districts everywhere, not just in Newark, and a model that they could then take to city after city. They had a lot of latitude. The state controls the Newark schools and now has for 20 years. And in fact, because the state was in such control, residents didn't hear of the revolution coming to their schools until they saw it on Oprah that day. It's now been 4.5 years. And there have been a lot of changes in Newark. There is a new teacher's contract that got a lot of attention. There's a significant growth of charter schools. There's the replacement of the system of neighborhood school assignments with the universal enrollment system. There's also been, and we have a new mayor in Newark. Cory Booker has left for the Senate, and Ras Baraka is now the mayor of Newark. There's also been a significant public backlash that fueled the election of Mayor Baraka, who called for the removal of the superintendent, Kenny Anderson, and the return of Newark schools to local control, which Governor Chris Christie refused to do. We're going to do something that probably you've never believed could happen. We are going to discuss education reform in Newark. We are probably going to disagree, and we are going to remain civil and respectful of each other, and we're going to keep the conversation going. So I'd like to tell you about this very impressive and diverse panel we have here today. This is right next to me is Kimberly McLean. She's the CEO of the Foundation for Newark's Future, which is the local entity that was created to receive and dispense the philanthropy in Newark. The $100 million from Mark Zuckerberg and a matching $100 million, which was the challenge grant. This is Dominique Lee. He can give a very great perspective on the inside world of the schools because he leads a school turnaround organization that is now turning around 2 of the lower performing schools in the city of Newark. It's called BRIC, Building Responsible, Intelligent, Creative Kids. Vanessa Rodriguez is the Director of Talent for the Newark Public Schools. She's a very senior deputy to the superintendent, Kenny Anderson. Jen Holleran is the Director of Startup Education, which is the foundation that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan have created to dispense their philanthropy. Mary Bennett is a longtime educator in the Newark Public Schools for 40 years, a teacher and a principal, very, very respected, a proud product of the Newark Public Schools herself, and she currently works for 2 universities in New Jersey as a mentor to new principals and new teachers. So she brings a diverse background herself. And Lauren Wells, a scholar in her own right. Dr. Wells is also the education advisor to Mayor Ras Baraka. So we're going to start it off with Jen and Vanessa. We'd like you to talk about what was and is the vision and what has been accomplished in Newark in the last 4.5 years.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. It's something that we all have been absolutely immersed in this work for the last 5 years, or 40 for some. And really happy to be able to be here, and I think you will hear very different, diverse perspectives. So I will just frame sort of from the lens of Mark and Priscilla as they formed the partnership with Governor Christie and then Mayor Cory Booker at the time to try to do as much as they could in a 5-year period to really improve the schools dramatically. And that was all public schools in Newark was the idea, the district as well as the charters. Newark's a place where there is pretty broad consensus that there's a lot of improvement necessary and a lot of disagreement about how to go about doing that. The idea behind the partnership and the philanthropic piece of it was giving the support to bipartisan partnership who had a lot of sort of ability to try to make a big difference for the kids of the city in a place where there was great need. The basic approach for the philanthropic effort, at least, was to think about trying to make catalytic systemic change within 5 years that was then sustainable over time. Also recognizing that this work is incredibly complex, multifaceted, and will take like levels and levels of work. So the idea of this sort of pretty short time period of 5 years was catalytic and systemic, and then the sustainable piece. So we're in our final year trying to really work on the sustainable piece and trying to figure out like how to get more people involved and from the support side be able to do that after we spent a lot of the time on the systemic up till now. So the really foundational principle was that the teachers and principals are absolutely key to making a difference in kids' success ultimately, and we need to come to as effective teachers as possible. So I think Vanessa will be able to talk more about the teacher's contract, which is a performance-based contract rewarding the high-performing teachers significantly and not rewarding the ineffective teachers and giving incentive to change there. And then these are also, I would say, things that we feel really optimistic about as the structural pieces. So again, you'll hear more about that, especially as a way to get to more effective teachers and the early pieces that we are really excited about in terms of retaining the most effective teachers. On the charter growth side, this is a piece that has not gotten that much press, but it is incredible, the growth there. 14% of kids were in charters in 2000 and is 31.5% now. And this is within a charter sector that Credo just put out a report this month. And Newark was one of the only 4 cities cited for how consistently good, not perfectly, but quite consistently good and outperforming the charter sector was. And the growth has generally happened with the highest performing charters, with KIPP, with North Star, an Uncommon School, and several other local providers that are some of the higher performers. And this growth has happened while 2 schools have also been closed down for being low performing, some of the lowest performing. So again, rewarding performance. So you'll also be able to talk more about the choice and universal enrollment that has undergirded all of this, and the need to get to more equity of choice. And the district has also been able to develop some new schools as well as do turnaround. So we feel very optimistic that over the long haul, those changes are going to make a really big difference. I would also just say our perspective, Mark Priscilla's perspective, is very much around wanting to learn from the things that have worked, from the things that haven't worked. We've launched several different studies that are public studies to try to get to the student level, what outcomes are for students and what that looks like. And I think you'll be hearing over the next 9 months about some of those results. They're very much underway studies, case studies. But Tom Kane from Harvard's doing one of them, trying to really understand what are the outcomes for kids, is there more equity of access to the highest quality schools, et cetera. So again, I guess you'll hear a lot about the long, hard work that this is, and again, I hope that we will be able to find a way to be able to bring more people into the work that is so critical for the kids in Newark and really critical across our country of improving the public schools, both district and charter.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you all for being here and wanting to learn about the work we're doing. District work is probably the hardest work. I would imagine that the work that we're doing has been really tough in lots of different ways, and one of them is how do you really explain the complexity of what you're trying to do and do it really fast, because you're thinking about kids who have been in a community where there hasn't been a ton of growth at the school level or increase in graduation rates. So when we came in, we definitely, the first thing was we had a sense of urgency to create a plan that would support all of our students in the city of Newark. And that is what One Newark is. That's the vision. One Newark is 100 excellent schools. Of the 100 schools in Newark, NPS has 70 of those schools. So charters do have a good number of the rest. And so for us in One Newark, we felt like we needed to partner with our charters and really create a vision about how do we get all of our schools to be performing at a high level. Part of that plan around One Newark was equity, which was the universal enrollment piece, which is, I think, Jen started to talk about. And we did create a universal enrollment process for the first time in the city of Newark. A lot of that was because families were demanding it. They were showing us that they wanted choice. They were choosing charters. We had 10,000 families in the South Ward who were on a waiting list for charter schools. And so at that point, we knew, I mean, 10,000 families, you know, they're telling us, we want choice, we want better options in our community. And at that, you know, that really struck us strongly and started to be part of why we knew we needed universal enrollment, to give families an opportunity to really say, where do I want my child to go, and to have that choice. Recently, there's a Brookings report that came out, and you know, we're rated 3rd in the country, greatest improved. We got an A- in terms of providing opportunity and good school choice options for families to be able to have a voice in what they want for their children. And so that to us has been a huge success in this past year in particular, because we worked extremely hard over the last 2 years to create a process that was equitable, fair, and allowed parents to really rate what they wanted. And so they could rank their top 8 schools in the city, and we would work to meet that. And we have met about 80% of the top 3 choices of families, and so that was for us a huge success. With that, we also did start some schools. So not only did we do the universal enrollment process, but we did say, what are the current needs of our students? What are we not providing them? Where are we seeing that there are absent programming? So we've opened some programs around overage undercredited students. We have increased our graduation rates, and I think it is due to some of that programming that we've done for overage undercredited. We've also opened an all-girls school and an all-boys school because families were asking for that. They wanted an environment where they could have children coming together of the same sex, and so that they could feel like, okay, I'm in an environment where especially with our girls program, it's like, I want my daughter to feel like she has a voice. So we open a girls academy, and those have definitely been a draw. We also work to ensure that they were located in a community that felt like they would have more access to that type of programming, where in the past they didn't. So we co-located them in a high school that was built for 2,000 students, but on average, before we rolled out One Newark, had about 500 students on the enrollment list and about 300 attending. Now, we've pretty much filled the building with 3 different types of schools and 3 programs in that building. So it's a vibrant high school community now. That has been a huge success for us. And then in terms of the contract, I felt...
You're 2 minutes.
Okay. In terms of the contract, we have made some real progress in terms of retaining our highest performing teachers, and I do think it's because of what's been in the contract, which is peer validation, a lot of support systems around having peers giving feedback to one another, and of course the bonus part is a draw. People like to get paid for doing a good job, but when you talk to our highly effective teachers, that's not why they stay. And we do retain, and we're seeing that we're retaining more of our highly effective and effective teachers than our ineffective and partially effective teachers. We retain 95% of our highly effective and effective teachers, and about 60% of our partially effective and ineffective teachers. So that's telling us we have more great teachers in front of our kids every day because of the work we've done in the last few years. That's tremendous, and we're very proud of that work, and we want to continue it. And we're seeing some leading indicators around some of our renew schools, which are our turnaround schools. We're seeing growth. We're not at proficiency yet. It takes a long time to move to proficiency when you have students who are 3 or 4 years behind. But we are seeing growth. And to us, that is showing that in the next few years, we're working towards that proficiency, and I think that we can get there. It takes a long time to turn around a district and to create change. And I think that we're probably right in the middle of it. And if we had 4 more years that we could count on, I think that we would absolutely get there. And we're looking to see what can we sustain this year going forward into next year. We'll see if we get those 4 years, we'll do it. But at this point, I think that we are very happy in seeing where we're heading and the work that we've done and the focus on our families and our students, which to me has definitely been the priority of our administration, is to ensure that our families who are demanding better schools had a voice.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, this is very much in midstream. The data, the student data that would show improvement really hasn't materialized yet. And so I'd like to hear from Mary about what is your perspective of how do we know whether and when reform is working and how long it takes.
Well, perspective obviously is everything. I could say that this room is pitch black and you could say, no, Mary, there are lights on. But I want to address the reform and the situation in Newark from the perspective, it's been 20 years that the state has been in control of the district. And there were some steps, some incremental growth and programs that were moving forward. Unfortunately, and I need to come from two perspectives. One is an educator and a product of the district, and two is a community person whose voices have not been heard. The main underpinning that will not allow this reform to have the success that it should have or needs to have for all of our children deserve the best schools, is because the community has been totally disenfranchised. And I can say that with honesty, and if you see me afterwards, I'll give you links that you can actually go on and see videos where parents are talking about, no one talked to us. There was a school, Burgaw Avenue School. Gentleman, Mr. Tillman, has 5 children. As a result of the One Newark plan, when he got his assignments for his children, all 5 were assigned to different schools. And so his question was, how do I get them to their bus stops, on the bus to school, and get myself to work? No one, absolutely no one is saying that Newark Public Schools were perfect when it was taken over July 19th, 1995. And no one is saying that we did not need to improve. But I'm looking at, I believe that's Dr. Fuller in the back, who spoke this morning in the keynote and talked about the need to include people in their destiny. The need to include people in their destiny. If you are claiming to do the right thing for the right reason for my child, you need to bring me to the table. Bring me along, show me. As the hard decisions, and hard decisions do have to be made, but bring me into the conversation. Work with me. And when you put in a reform program such as the Renew School programs that Ms. Rodriguez spoke to, that the superintendent, perhaps her reach was too far, originally said in March of 2012 that these 8 schools will in 2 years show 50% proficiency, and as of today, 1 school was closed, and 6 schools have not even shown growth. It is hard work. It's complex work. Our children in Newark come from a community riddled with poverty. More than 44% live below the extreme poverty level per federal standards. You've got to work that. And just coming in and closing schools, many of which are the linchpin for kids in their community, is not going to bring about the kind of improvement that you want. And along the way, things that could have been positive take on a very, very negative and detrimental spin. So Newark wasn't perfect and still isn't perfect, but this is also not the solution.
Thank you, Mary. Vanessa, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. I do think there are a couple of things. One is around engagement and family engagement. We take it very seriously. We know that that is a part of the work, and for us, engagement lives at the school level. Our principals are selected because they value and respect the work they're doing. We have promoted many of our principals, particularly our Renew principals. We have 9 Renew schools, and a Renew school is a school that's been traditionally low performing, where we ask the staff and the principal to basically reapply for their job and show that they are able to truly move that school. Because keeping the same staff in the same building year after year, and you're not getting growth or results with kids means something's happening with adults. So we put accountability at the doorstep of our adults, and we said, reapply for a job. Show us that you can move our students to be better performers. In that, we did promote in our 9 Renew schools last year. 8 of our 9 were internal promotions. Folks that are coming from teaching positions, VP positions, and they have been turning around the school. The first thing they tackled, and if you talk to many of our families in these schools, they'll say that the culture has definitely changed. It's a safer community, It is safer in those school buildings. There are structures that create a safe learning environment so that kids want to be in school. Our attendance in those schools has increased, family participation has increased, and a lot of it is because of the principles that were promoted from within. So in terms of engagement and family voice, of course that's important. I totally agree with you, Mary. I think it's an essential part of the work that we're doing and an essential part of the work that any school would do. Our first commitment is to our families and our students. And then next would be folks who are not within our schools. And I think we prioritize our school community so much that I think folks that are advocates on the outside feel a little bit left out, frankly, but we truly believe the priority is really talking with our families and our students and putting them first. So on the Renew work that we're doing, we've seen great progress and we are going to continue to focus on that. I truly believe that we're going to see continuous growth that will come to tremendous outcomes. But that takes time and it takes a lot of work and effort at the school level, and it begins with having the right adults in your building.
There are two sets of Renew schools. The first set was the 8 that I referenced, and now there's a second set. So we looked at the data, and again, I can give you the link to the analyses that were done that show you using the indices that the superintendent said were going to be used, which were student growth performance percentages, and you can read the data for yourself. Secondly, absolutely, I was a principal of a large comprehensive high school. When I became principal, I had 1,000 students. When I left, I had 1,450. The school grew by 40%, and 90% of my kids came from high-rise, low-income projects. So critically, I had to have a relationship with the community. But the one thing that we also knew, the community had a relationship with the district leadership. Unfortunately, our current leadership and the community do not work well together, it would seem, and our superintendent has not attended a community board meeting in 15 months. That's not my imagination, that's a fact. So those two tiers of communication and community engagement have to go, yes, to the building, but it has to go across the community in terms of people feeling there's a leader that respects us, that will talk with us, that will even listen to us when we're not saying the things they necessarily want to hear, but as the person serving that community, that is necessary. Now, the second set of Renew schools were just opened this past September. We have not done any analyses because we don't have any of that data. I would say there's a problem if you go to the New Jersey Department of Education website. All the school performance reports for the district somehow reflect 100% attendance. I've been affiliated with this district for 40 years. There's never been a day when we had 100% attendance. So that's a reporting structure. I don't know what happened, but that's not a fair representation. As Ms. Rodriguez said and as Jen said, it's a complex situation. Everybody needs to be at the table working at solving it together.
Amen.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the school level. As I said, Dominique runs a turnaround organization called Building Responsible, Intelligent, Creative Kids. It's responsible for the turnaround of 2 very low performing, very low income kindergarten through 8th grade schools. So how do you see reform from your perspective?
No problem. So just to give a little context, we started 5 years ago. We celebrated our 5th year anniversary. And at the time, we took over Avon Avenue. Takeover is usually not the word that I use. I don't know why I just used that. We partnered with the Avon community.
These are district schools.
They're traditional public schools.
Took over.
And the whole purpose of what we wanted to do is that we were all in classrooms at the time, and we wanted to do something a bit different, which is basically take the best practices that you might see from traditional public schools and charter schools and basically infuse them into an environment that historically had problems when it comes to student achievement. So Avon at the time was the worst performing school in our city and second in the state, and it's been actually was the principal of my former high school where I used to teach. Fed into Shabazz, so that's kind of why we wanted Avon. I'm happy to say that 5 years later, we've had 5 years of consistent growth in the amount of kids being proficient on our exam, on the state exam, and we actually were responsible for one of the Renew schools that Ms. Rodriguez talked about, the one Renew school that also had consistent growth for the past 2 years. So with that growth and everything, I will say that, as everyone's pointed out, it's been a very complex situation. the environment that our schools are in, 50% of my scholars live on less than 10% of annual income coming into the household. The amount of trauma that our children experience, the amount of issues that stem from generational poverty, makes this work so hard on so many levels. And it takes an amount of human capital. It takes a lot of resources that, you know, one of our funders are up here, you can guess who, to initiate some of the work. But we have realized that at the ground level, it really just boils down to how do you effectively meet the needs of children and families. You can hear all this noise up here, but at the bottom line, we're at the ground level trying every day to hit our targets, which is very simple, to meet the needs of our children and families. We have propelled ourselves into a whole nother space of trying to stabilize our families in order to ensure that our children are successful, because the issues that are going on in the community come into the environment. And Dr. Wells at the end was one of the ones who really pushed me in this direction. She always used to hit me over the head on this regarding this. So I would say at the level, you know, when we hear reform, we hear all this stuff, but at the ground level, it really just boils down to that we're trying to tackle God's, you know, command of us, which is to protect the most vulnerable in our society. And it's complex, and it's hard, and it takes everyone at the table. You know, it just can't be one person telling you what to do, no matter where they are. It has to be a community of individuals that basically are striking that same chord and playing that guitar. You know?
Do you have the resources you need to do this?
I would say I'm a huge fan of school choice, and I will never say block a charter school or any type of school. I think parents need to have every option in the world. Unfortunately, what has happened in Newark, and this is across the nation, public policy has not caught up with school choice. So there's a, you know, as you increase one type of seats over here, you have fixed or variable costs on the other end, right? So when you increase choice, you have to give the main body, which is our traditional public schools, the ability to right-size itself in an appropriate way. Unfortunately, in the state of New Jersey, our public policy has not caught up with that. So we have a lot of rules and regulations that either prohibit or make it extremely hard to right-size the district. So we actually did a study because we were trying to see why does a school up the street, one of my good friends runs a charter school, have all these resources? What is going on here? Average charter school in Newark is about $15,000 to $16,000 per child. Out of that $16,000, they spend about 11 to 12 on direct classroom instruction. So you might see 2 counselors in the school, you might see 2 kindergarten teachers, you might see additional interventions per grade level, you see a whole host of resources that the school has their fingertips on.
These are to support the families of the children.
Yeah, and also resource support the families of the children. Unfortunately, due to this historical problem of bureaucracy and all this stuff, the traditional public school will get about $8,000 into the actual classroom.
How much do we get per kid?
The district gets about $24,000. Once you minus pension and all that stuff, the district actually gets cash in hand about $19,000. So because public policy has not caught up, that forces traditional public schools to basically have to fundraise and do all types of things and work miracles. So we do need help on this funding side of public policy and politicians stepping up to the plate to make, you know.
I'd just like to point out that the Avon Avenue School has the lowest income catchment area in Newark. And if you can imagine the lowest income area of Newark, that's a lot lower than most places. And they have 1 kindergarten teacher in each classroom, and the charter schools in the neighborhood have 2. They have 1 English and 1 math teacher, grades 1 through 3. The charter schools have 2. And they have that many teachers in the classroom because kids need that level of support in order to perform. So it's really hard to imagine how a school like Avon can compete in terms of student performance with the charter schools without those resources.
And that's not blaming one person. This has been a decade problem. It's been years.
It's systemic.
It's systemic,
it's
right?
like it explains what's going on.
It explains, and we have to fix that as a community of practitioners.
And the other thing Dominique often says is that when they had thought when they started this school turnaround that if they could work on, you know, really strong support and development of their teachers, that after students had entered kindergarten and been at the school through 3rd grade, they would have a very high percentage of kids reading by 3rd grade with that kind of support. But what's happened is, what percentage of kids who enter in kindergarten are still there in 3rd grade?
So across the Southboard, you have a 25 to 30% transient rate. People, unfortunately, due to not enough low-income housing, a whole host of issues, are not able to stabilize themselves in the community. So every year we will end the school year about 650 kids. Out of 650, we will miss about 100 to 200, but not reappear in August. But here's the fascinating thing: we will backfill those 150. So we've maintained 650 kids all 5 years.
But the kids who get to 3rd grade, what percentage of them were there in kindergarten?
Well, we actually did the last cohort, so we are now in 4th grade. We have less than 20% of those kids in our building.
And your results?
Yeah, we're still been able to have good results every year, but we took, in our math, we were at 10% overall passing, we're up to 47, and now I would only imagine if we were able to keep all of our kids where we would be, if we were able to go, have 100% of our population. I think we would at least be at 80% if all our kids were still in our building every year.
And
can I shed one thing? I think one of the things for us that we think is so important is to learn from these things and try to figure out solutions more broadly. So this funding question, for instance, one of the things we've been able to do as a national foundation is then think about how do you get more visibility into this funding problem. And there's this new organization started that we're backing a little bit, and others are backing as well, to look at the quality of student outcomes and the money spent, and then be able to drill down on how the money is spent. And part of what that's to do is to help people like Dominique and others trying to figure out how to spend money more efficiently, and then on the policy level also demonstrate what's possible and hopefully put some pressure on the policy.
Yeah, because the decline in enrollment that we've experienced in the district level where students are choosing charters means we have fewer students, so we're getting fewer dollars coming in, yet we still have the same number of teachers and adults in our system. And so that's why for us the evaluation process and the contract was crucial, right? It was an opportunity to say, if we're going to retain our teachers, we want to ensure we're retaining our best teachers, one. But two, we've also decided that we need to reevaluate how many of these excess teachers we can really maintain during a time where we're not actually getting more dollars coming into the district. We're actually creating a gap. And so we have talked a lot, and I've worked a lot on this specifically about an equivalency where we can, if we are forced to have to lay off teachers, we can do it considering their tenure, their seniority, alongside performance, but not just, because usually if you have to go down that road, the only thing that is considered is the years of service. And so tenure, you may lose some of your best teachers because they're your youngest teachers in the district in terms of years of experience. And to us, that's unacceptable. We need our best teachers in our schools. We need our best teachers in front of our children. And so seniority alongside performance is crucial.
Okay, thank you. We need to move on. Another issue that's become a huge issue in Newark is the fact that the state controls the district schools and has for 20 years. And initially, Cory Booker and Chris Christie saw this as a great advantage because they would have the latitude to make changes even if they were unpopular. It also had some downsides, and I'd like to hear from Lauren Wells, the education advisor to Mayor Baraka, about the effect that state control has had on the reform process.
So like everyone else, I'm glad to be here in this forum discussing issues that are very, very important to the children and families and the taxpayers of the city of Newark. I think advantages is an understatement. I think that the state has used local control to facilitate what is essentially the privatization of the district. There has been a complete breakdown of governance, right? We're talking a lot about school leadership. However, the leadership and the governance system goes from the bottom up, and there is a complete absence of the input of the school board. There is a complete absence of the input of community stakeholders across the board in any of the reforms that have been rolled out over the last 5 years. And the impacts of this are that the voice wasn't heard, that the choices that were made may not necessarily have been the direction that families went in terms of school models, school strategies, et cetera, and as Mary spoke to earlier, all of these have made a clear sort of no impact, right? There's not evidence that the Renew School strategy has, as far as test scores are showing, has had an impact on student achievement as measured by proficiency, which is the standard that is used across the nation to close schools and to make decisions about what's happening in districts. And that comes from the federal government down. I think that there are other issues that have to do with budget, right? And all of this ties into governance. What's happening at the district level? Who is responsible for monitoring and controlling the spending of funds? The school board votes down budgets, and it's vetoed. At the end of July, there'll be at least a $30 million gap that has to be closed this year. And next year, the newspaper just reported, I think it's $35 million. So we're looking at, for the next 2 years, $70 million of money that is not there in the district. And there's been some creative budgeting strategies that have been used. For example, the amount that was advised to be set aside for charter schools was somewhere near $222 million. My understanding from the budget is that what was put aside is about $200 million. So the money wasn't there to account for the costs that are going to be there when the fiscal year closes at the end of June. These are all things that are tied to district level governance. And the ability to do these things are tied to the fact that the state uses state control, as the quote that you read at the beginning of your opening, to eliminate the democratic process in the city of Newark. I think it's very hard to talk about simply about choice, to talk about equity, and to eliminate democracy in the process. And so these are issues that across the board, and I think that there's a very wide swath of stakeholders, whether they are charter school advocates or traditional school advocates, charter school parents or traditional school parents, because like the father who had his 5 children in 5 different schools, we have parents who have their children in both. They're residents of the city, they're taxpayers of the city, and they want to be engaged in the process of determining what the governance of their district looks like. There are issues in terms of, we talk about the performance, attendance. Chronic absenteeism has gone up. Attendance counselors were laid off. Guidance counselors were laid off. These positions were cut. And these are, if we talk about poverty and we talk about the reality of the lives of our children and what they go through every day, to disrupt poverty, right? Poverty is not an excuse not to do anything. And I think it's really important to be clear about that and to kind of take this no excuses mantra out of those of us who say you need to pay attention to poverty. Poverty matters a lot. Poverty matters on the development of children from before they come out of the womb. It matters to the resources that schools have. It matters to the resources that communities have. And in a place like Newark, to extract the school from the community and to simply say, well, we're going to focus on teachers and leadership and put schools in a bubble where they're not at all connected with the many resources that exist in the city, is to explicitly not pay attention to the impacts of poverty on the whole aspect of the whole child. Right? Not just learning, the socio-emotional aspects of the child. There are hospitals in the city of Newark. There are community organizations in the city of Newark, organizations that deal with things like recidivism and prisoner reentry. And when we think about our children and fathers and mothers who are returning from prison, and how do you reconnect the child to the family and make sure that there's a whole process where parents are brought into learning inside the school. These are resources that are not utilized. They're resources that at a convention that we had earlier this year, across the board, regardless of where your child was in school, people said are necessary to the well-being and the development of the children in our city and the academic learning. Those of us who think about poverty and think it matters to how you organize your resources and how you organize your system, think that learning matters very much. I think that learning matters a lot. I was a high school teacher. I have 3 degrees. Of course I think that learning matters a lot. I think that there's a way in which you utilize your resources to ensure that what you're doing is facilitating and accelerating the development of children who have not had access to things, because poverty creates opportunity gaps and resource gaps, all kinds of them. Mary talked about the lack of community engagement. That's real. It's one thing to say we're going to engage parents at the school level, we're going to bring you in, we're going to make sure that you have information about what's good for your child and the Common Core and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all things that every parent needs everywhere. But there's a larger conversation that I'm certain that many people who live in wealthy districts who pay taxes would be very upset if they weren't having, if somebody came in and said, as a community, your voice doesn't matter.
That's true.
So it's very disingenuous to talk about equity, to talk about choice, and to not acknowledge that that is a real reality that many people who do the talking about equity and choice exercise in the districts where they live with their children and their families. I mean, I could go on. There are violations of Title I. There's a violation of the Title I waiver, the RAP waiver. There are all kinds of things that are happening in the district. I sat with a woman 2 weeks ago, came in with a 9th grade student who was in a school that closed last year, chose a charter school as their first choice. And when he got to the school has none of the services that are required on his IEP, and he has been suspended every month since he got to school. But he chose that school. And they chose that school. And she allowed him to choose that school, and they had no idea whether or not that school would meet the needs of that child. And when we talk about choice, and when we talk about universal enrollment, and we talk about matching students with schools, we have to be really, really clear that what the other side of the matching process is actually matching families and children to what they need, not what they think they're getting, because it's a charter school, or because it's a new model, or it's because it's some other example that's not the traditional charter, the traditional district school. And I think we have to really work on branding our district schools. We have to, if the work that we're doing is the work that we say we're doing, and we're working to accelerate learning and to turn these schools around, then we need to be out there waving the flag of the schools that we're investing in to turn them around so that they are part of the full conversation. And the last thing that I'm going to say about choice is this universal enrollment application rolled out. About 15,000 families filled it out. Most of them were families that were required to do so by the guidelines of the application. However, there's another 22,000 families in the district that chose not to complete the application. It was well advertised. People knew about it. They didn't have to do it. There's a number of families that did do it because, as the district says, they were seeking better options. But 22,000, that's about 60% of the district, did not fill out the application. That was their choice. So what does that choice say when we're having this conversation about choice? And I think that these are data, these are information, these are conversations that we need to be having at the district level. They need to be tied to disaggregated data about attendance, about all kinds of enrollment patterns in the district, which nobody has seen. State control means no data that's publicly available and no real data conversations that happen and that engage the board, the community, and the entire district on what's happening inside of the schools.
Jen, would you like to take this question also?
Well, I mean, I think the piece that's the biggest overlay for me, and it's actually the title of this panel too, Newark at a Crossroads, it's very much, I think Newark is at a crossroads. There's been so much fighting that it's actually incredibly hard to get those services you're talking, like to get people aligned and working together. And I think that's the crossroads piece, like how can people work together? I think there are a couple pieces that I've heard of, I'm sure more that you all know of, that there's been much more organized effort to do that. NCLC is one, a collective action piece trying to get like 60 organizations across the city aligned toward getting 25% of the city post-secondary degrees by 2025. And my question is, how can more of that happen? How can there be more partnership and actual communication? Because it is two-way. And I think the fighting, and certainly if you're reading any of the newspapers, that's what you read the most about, right? Just fighting. And it's really all about the kids and how can we be harnessing those pieces to be moving all the resources of the organizations that are serving kids in other ways that are, I mean, Dominique is a really interesting example because, but he's a little bit of a standalone example in both operating a school and trying to figure out about how to bring those services.
So
You know,
I would like to respond to that.
Because I actually wanted to jump to.
Can I?
Okay.
So I think that when the state-appointed superintendent arrived in the district in 2010, I think it was? 11, that, well, she got there a little bit early.
No, it was 2011.
Okay, 2011,
May
when she arrived in 2011, that the community did embrace her. Yeah, I'm certain of that, actually, because I was a part of that, right? And so there was dialogue, there was a desire to know and understand. The superintendent didn't arrive to people out in the streets screaming and hollering and acting like Newarkers are, you know, consistently labeled. She arrived to people wanting to have conversations with her, wanting to hear from her, wanting to be a part of a process. And I do think it's about kids. And I think that people are fighting for and about their kids. They're also fighting for and about their voice. They're also fighting for and about their right to play a part in the destiny of their children, their community, and their schools. And you can't extract any one of those things from the larger conversation. I'm a part of NCLC. I sit on the board of NCLC.
NCLC is the Newark City of Learning.
Learning Collaborative.
It's to increase the percentage of college graduates.
Yes, and it's a great space where there's a wonderful focus on the 4,000 kids that are disconnected from school. But I don't think that we got to disagreement and disengagement because the community threw its arms up. I think, and I know because I was present at meetings, I think prior to when some people arrived in the district, that a plan was presented. And there was no opportunity for people to weigh in, to give input on that plan. And I think that that's also on videotape somewhere as well at Rutgers University. Right, and so that's my understanding of how we get to the point where people are wanting to be heard and wanting to be part of a process. It wasn't because the community threw up its outsider flag and said, go away, go away, go away, we don't want to hear from you. It was because there was a shutout of the creation of a plan into which the people who have been part of the city, parents and otherwise, did not have input into the development of.
Well, you know, we haven't heard from Kim yet, and she has she's been hiding out over there. I'm going to out her now. And she has an interesting perspective on this very issue because she is CEO of the Foundation for Newark's Future. So she is the person who represents the philanthropists who are, you know, in Newark perceived as outsiders, although generous outsiders. And she also works very closely with the community and the stakeholders in the community, and from what I hear is very well regarded and trusted by them. So I would just like to know, given, you know, the circumstance we've come to in Newark, how have you accomplished that?
Hello everyone, I'm glad to be here, as everyone else has said, and as you can hear, Newark really is at a crossroads, and for me it's a little bit of a difficult position because, as Dale mentioned, I represent the foundation and our focus is really on systemic change, which people can't always see and feel and touch, so it makes it more complicated. At the same time, I'm very much a part of the fabric of the city of Newark. I've gone to church there for 10 years and have really strong relationships. So for me, it's about operating with fidelity. Like, we've got to get past all of the rancor and the disagreements. We may not all agree on what needs to be done, but we know that change is necessary. And the way I operate is that when I'm in the boardroom and we're having conversation, I'm bringing the community voice. So while we're talking about a 30,000 foot theory of change, I'm talking about how it impacts Johari and Tykeem, which I know. And then when I'm in the community and people are complaining about, their placement and not being engaged, then I'm able to offer, the rationale behind decisions that were made. And people on both sides won't always agree, but they know what I bring to them is truth, honesty, and integrity. And I think that the last thing I'll say is we've got to get past this ideology, these ideological debates. The reality is we cannot have a top-down approach to help our children singularly. That's not going to solve it. You must involve the community. At the same time, we cannot ignore that change is necessary. So instead of being in our corners and being in our silos, we need to sit together and find areas of common ground, because while we're debating and discussing and having this level of disagreement, it's our children that are suffering. And so that's the lens I try to bring to this debate.
Thank you. I'm wondering, we've already gone 45 minutes, and we have only 25 minutes to go. We could go to questions. Is that okay with everyone? And unless you don't have questions, we'll just keep talking, whatever. Does anyone have questions for the panel? Yes? You.
Hi, my name is Tim Yang, and I'm a high school teacher at Eastside High School in Ironbound, Newark, New Jersey. Eastside! It's an honor and privilege to be teaching in the city of Newark. So I just wanted to reference Dale's article, and you mentioned that the Facebook money, $31 million of it, was spent on the union back pay. I would just like to ask Jen and Kimberly, could you walk me through how a contract can lead to concrete, measurable, and observable steps to improve the outcomes of my children? The contract.
Yeah, so I would say I think the contract is the structure that allows people within the district to do their work really well. So, and the contract, I mean, as referenced before, in the state of New Jersey, seniority is the rule of law. Generally speaking, in school systems, you progress at the same pay increases without any differentiation. I assume you're probably a really good teacher if you're engaged enough to want to come learn more. I hope, sure hope so. And the importance of figuring out how structurally to be able to give flexibility to focus on quality, that is the whole goal of the contract. So for people who don't know, it's a contract that is broken into 4 different level, an evaluation system that undergirds the contract, broken into 4 different levels of evaluation. And at the top end, the teachers who are the highly effective teachers get bonuses for both being highly effective and then being in the hardest to staff subjects as well as the hardest to serve schools. So at the lowest end, you don't necessarily get a pay increase if you're ineffective, and if you're partially effective, it's a little more discretionary. And if you're in the 3rd category, you get your pay increase, but you don't get bonuses. So as Vanessa referenced, that's actually starting to play out. It takes a long time, right, to play out over time. So that's one piece. The other piece, there's all sorts of discussion about whether this is good or bad, but the ability to be able to do turnaround work on 10 schools a year is part of that contract. The other piece is tying professional development to, and the credentials that you get to effectiveness of teaching is also part of that contract. So those are the pieces that we think are really important structurally, but the real work happens when you you figure out how to help teachers develop and do the supports. And this was all done with the teachers union. If you go back and look at articles, rave reviews from the teachers union when it got signed. Randy Weingarten praising it, etc. And it's that work in developing also an effective evaluation system to be able to figure out what supports are necessary and then offer them.
Another huge part of the contract is the peer oversight committee, which is 5 NTU members and 5 district members, which include a principal, a VP, and some administrator assistant superintendents. I actually chair the committee, and it's an opportunity to hear feedback from teachers who are on the ground consistently, letting us know how is the evaluation being implemented, how is it impacting teachers. On the other side of that is also the peer validation process, where we have a group of experienced senior teacher leaders come in and observe to give feedback to teachers. How are you doing? You know, if you're an ineffective teacher, we want to give you more consistent feedback to ensure that we're giving you every opportunity to grow and develop. We have seen small movement of ineffective teachers to partially effective, more teachers from partially effective to effective, which is telling us that we're growing our teachers. And this year in particular, due to the work we did laying down the groundwork around the contract and the evaluation process, we started a new program called LIFT, which is all for teacher leaders. I'm sure you've heard of it in your school in some place, or hopefully, if not, tell me. But we are doing a lot of that work to provide more opportunities for growth and development. And when Kim said, see, feel, touch, our entire model around supporting the schools and putting the autonomy and the choice factor at the school level, the engagement level, work at it, is that sometimes you have all these departments that live at the central office. Like you have an attendance office that sits at the central office. You have all these people who sit at the central office and they're making decisions, and it is absent of the school. So part of what we've done in trying to right size it is to ensure that the people who are making decisions can see, feel, and touch it and be at the school level. So we've embedded into our school models, particularly around the Renew School models, more social and emotional learning positions for a focus on supporting the whole child. We've done restorative practices at the school level. We've hired people to run those programs at the school level. We've put folks who are at the school level who are doing the attendance work and who go out to school. We have a new position that we created called the Community Specialist Engagement Person. That person does parent trainings. They do opportunities for parents to come into the classrooms and observe. So a lot of it is we know, I was talking to 2 parents last night at an event who came out, who are parents at Eagle Academy, one of the new school programs that we created. Because of what's happening at the school level, their principal has brought fencing into their school. Their boys have never experienced that. They're doing squash. First they were like, isn't that, the mom was like, no, it's a vegetable, I don't know what you're talking about. And then they had this whole program around squash, and the kids are experiencing that. So I think it is important to think about how is it that a central office actually supports and makes it really important that the school is what's grounding what's happening for children.
Thank you. We only have 10 more minutes, so you want to be quick?
I think that this is a little bit of part of the challenge that we have on the ground. At a school board, a business meeting, maybe a month ago, there was a discussion about the rise of chronic absenteeism and what was in place at the school level to support or to address this issue at the same time that there's an attendance campaign, and the response was grade level meetings. And grade level meetings, you can talk about individual student issues, but that's not a response to chronic absenteeism. So these positions and all of these things that have just been discussed here, the evidence of those things are not anywhere in the public conversation on the ground in the city. And so if they do exist, we certainly need to know about them.
Thanks. We have time for another question. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jamila Prince Stewart, and I'm part of an emerging organization in the city of Bridgeport, Faith Acts for Education. We're a faith-based education advocacy organization. First thing I want to say is, Ms. Bennett, I hear you. And I just want to acknowledge that. I hear you. And I think there's a fundamental problem because we have these conversations over and over and over again when we get this level of feedback. People are not asking to be engaged. People are not asking to be involved. So my question, going back to the question of this conference, the why do we dismiss the community's demand to be decision makers? Why do we dismiss that?
Can I just add one quick thing? Dr. Fuller this morning said, people want to be helped, they don't want to be controlled. And that speaks to what you said, but who would like to take that question about the community?
Well, I think that there is this.
Can we just let Mary talk?
Thank you to the young lady, because I'm representing 13 different organizations. I'm representing 30,000+ children and their families, and it is time. It is time for state takeover to end. They've had 20 years, and they haven't fixed it. And right now we feel like the ground that we may have started to gain 5 or 6 years ago, we're losing. And the process that's in place that just causes people to want to reach out and touch somebody is not healthy, and it's not helping our children. It does not have to be this way, but as long as the politics dominate, and I'm not talking about the politics in Newark, our superintendent is state appointed. The person that she responds to is not her immediate supervisor, Commissioner Hespy, it's the governor. And this needed never to have gotten to this point because, as Dr. Wells said, when she came, we met with her. But after several meetings and you're asking questions and getting no answers, after a while, the God only gives us so much time on this planet. We need to use it wisely. 3 meetings I personally attended with the superintendent and asked her, okay, 15th Avenue, which just happens to be my elementary school, was closed. You didn't send the children to a high-performing school. You sent them 6 blocks away to another school that was struggling. Did they get there? There were 325 of them. Did they get there? That doesn't seem like an outrageous question to ask. And guess what? 3 meetings later, we never got an answer. We got to maybe 235 got there. These are all underage children who had to be in school. If the rest didn't get there, where did they go? So the disenfranchisement, the feeling that you're not being heard, has built to this level of angst and tension. And it cannot continue because the people losing are our children.
Right. Dominique, would you like to talk about the need of the community's demand to be heard from your parents and your organization's perspective?
Yes, so anytime we enter into the community, we go door to door to introduce ourselves, to make sure that we build that relationship so when there is an issue arise, they know that they can call us. And we build advocacy in our parents. So Charity Haygood, one of our principals, she's an amazing person. And she tells people, the parents, you need to challenge us when you feel something is wrong. But the thing that we have struggled with as an organization is that we're dealing sometimes with parents that have been beaten down and been left out of the picture, what Brian Stevens called the untouchables of America. And how do we build agency within our parents so they can have the power to demand us as practitioners at the school level to demand on us? And then, you know, that's the next phase of our parent engagement work, is trying to figure that out, decide how do we continue to ask our parents. We don't want you to just say yes. We want you to have an opinion regarding what we're doing. And we want you to demand anytime that you feel something is wrong, uncomfortable, that is not, you're not challenging us, that's your job. Like, that's part of the accountability circle.
And you want to change something as a result of what you hear from them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I have one more question. Yeah, let's he was reacting the whole time.
I'm a pastor in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Call and response. I grew up in that.
And I'm glad I'm not a pastor in Newark, New Jersey. I just want to say that on record because it sounds like a city that's really, really divided. We have some tension in Bridgeport also, some division. But somebody has to be the grown-up here. Somebody has to be the mature person and say, we need both. Sound like you're doing some amazing things, but then you're not bringing people along with you for the journey. And I'm just wondering, is that going to be systemic? Is that going to sustain what you're doing? What is going to happen when the $100 million runs out?
Yeah. So that here. I think, and I think because we focused philanthropically on the structural, and we're 9 months from the end of 5 years, so it's really close. The good thing about that is that the focus on sustainability is huge, and given the fact that it's a pretty finite time period, there's also more ability to focus on some of the programmatic. And I think we probably should have done more of that from the start.
In the beginning,
and,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it wasn't clear how to, but it's in retrospect, like, how do you engage more people to be part of the solution? And And so we are very hopeful that in this last 9 months, we actually both have some money left to be able to do that. We've just funded this NCLC, which is represented as the broadest coalition, and we think it's really important. And I think, you know, if the structural is sort of the frame, and then who are the people on the ground making all of the pieces come together too. So I know for us, like, for Mark and Priscilla, this was the first thing that they did philanthropically, which for a 25 and 26-year-old is pretty unusual.
Yeah.
They are trying to they are so committed to education. They are so committed to trying to figure out how you work with local leaders to improve the schools for the highest need kids. That looks different in every community. Like the leaders who stepped up to do that in Newark were the mayor and the governor. And the leaders, as we start in the Bay Area, we've got a fund that we're working on in the Bay Area. There are different opportunities and different local leaders, and working with the superintendents there, they've got very different things that they're focusing on. We're focusing on like teacher training rather than this year with Ravenswood. That's the thing that they wanted to focus on most. And trying to really work with families and hear from families as well, but trying to learn throughout and apply those learnings and reach as many people as possible. And I think the question for Newark, as I said before, is at the crossroads, how does this come together to sustain? And for us, that's like the most critical question in this 5th year.
And Kim, as CEO of the foundation.
I wanted just to say one thing, because everybody keeps saying we didn't engage, and we did. We did engage, and we engage every day. I do it personally as a district representative. I think there is a difference between, and I respect that we all have different points of view and different experiences. I take this responsibility extremely seriously. I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, near Bridgeport. I have family in Bridgeport. My first language is Spanish. I am here today because of the teachers I had and the principal I had who advocated for me and helped my mother understand the process so where I could get an education that could get me to where I am today. And so we engage every day with families. We engage every day with families. And engagement doesn't necessarily mean agreement. And that's okay, we don't have to agree. But what was happening for children on the ground, where they were not, we have increased graduation rates for high school students. We have more highly effective teachers in front of kids. We're retaining them. They want to stay, they want to teach. We are growing Renew schools that are doing tremendous work and showing growth. So we're doing that at the ground level, at the school level, but we engage, and there were conversations across the board with even folks on this panel, right? We disagree, we agree to disagree, but change is hard. And when you have to do it and you have a sense of urgency, because it's children's lives every day, as we've all been talking about, sometimes, yes, you're gonna have to make some hard decisions to improve schools and to improve the situation in the classrooms in front of kids. And you know what? People are not gonna like it. And they're going to call you names, and they're going to say things about you, and they're going to point at you, and they're going to, you know, paint a picture of you because it's not aligned with maybe how the politics are being, you know, portrayed. But at the end of the day, I am responsible to children and families, and I think that the decisions that we're trying to make is at that level, and it will always be at the ground level, and it will always be as what's best for our kids and what is best for our families. And we take that extremely serious. So to say we don't engage is something that I've been sitting here quietly listening for a while now, and I had to say that. I had to say that. We do, every day.
Could we just, thank you very much.
77 pastors, by the way, just so in deference and realizing there's a role for the faith-based community to play in every city. 77 pastors across denominations last May wrote to the Commissioner of Education and met with him, expressing their concerns around these issues. And we know from whence you come and that you have a higher calling, but they weighed in. It took a lot for them to decide in their own ranks that this was something that they needed to do. And in the history of the city, it's never been done before. So I think that speaks to the import of it.
Very good.
And I just want to add that when we're talking about the hard decisions, you know, if you're going for some procedure and you find out that something has to be removed from you, somebody asks you about it, right? Somebody doesn't make that decision for you. If you have to have a limb removed or something like that, there is a process whereby a decision is made that is in your best interest. And so I think that that's really a part of what we need to be thinking about. None of this is personal at all. None of this is except for the kids. None of this is. This is not. Well, that's personal. But I'm talking about the other pieces of this. There is no piece of this. People have issues with the things that have happened to them and their community and their lack of involvement in the decision making. And that is something that people are angry about. It's not a personality contest. It's not a popularity contest. Those are things that people are angry about. For 20 years, we'll say that again, the district has been under state operation. And people are angry about that, and they're tired about that, and they're tired of not having the opportunity to exercise their democratic rights to determine what their destiny is. And so it's not popularity, it's not personality, it's history, it's kids, and it's the right to govern your community and your schools.
Just in answer to the pastor's sustainability question, how do we sustain all this? I'd like to just bring it back at the end to Kimberly McLean, who is the CEO of the Foundation for Newark's Future that is dispersing the philanthropy.
She's going to raise another $100 million?
Talk to Jen. Thank you.
Do you want to give?
No, thank you for your question. I think the sustainability piece is something we think about every single day because we know that's the only way to move forward. And I think it's actually bigger than the 5 years, as Mary has pointed out. It's much bigger than a $200 million initiative. And regardless of how we feel about engagement, whether we've engaged or whether we have not, in many ways perception is reality. So what I take on as the onus that regardless of what has been done, we've fallen short and we've got to do better, because had we gotten it right, we wouldn't have this level of conversation right now, and we would be focusing on outcomes for kids. So I would just say in closing that, you know, we all have to be self-reflective and think about what we can do differently. It's easy to point fingers and say what someone else is doing, but the reality is there is a community that is outraged. Are they going to be served well in the long term? We don't know that yet. We feel like we're moving in the right direction, and that remains to be seen. But we also have to be very clear that for the most part, we're talking about other people's children. And be honest about that, because those of us who have school-age children, they're not being educated in Newark, so I can't sit in judgment on a parent and say you don't have a right to be outraged or express your frustration, because it is not my journey. And if it was my journey, maybe I feel the same way. So we've got to have some honest conversations in order to move it forward.
I just want to thank everybody on this panel. I think they all represented And thank you for listening.
Thank you all for coming. This was really wonderful. Right now we have a break.